Hi guy, welcome to the AMIGArama podcast. I'm your host Lorfarius, and for this week we will be taking a look at Fury of the Furries. But as usual, before we jump right into that, let's have a look at some news. There's not much, I'm afraid, this week, but one thing that did stand out to me was an article I saw over on Indie Retro News. Someone's produced a Minesweeper clone called Sweep Out, and I'll just read the description. Sweep Out is a Minesweeper where you have to make the highest score, and those that are on the high score board using an Amiga Online with some RAM end up showing the world just how good you are. But beware, if your score can't be beaten, it can be destroyed, blasted by other players. So yeah, it's an online version of Minesweeper for original hardware. Does say that TCP/IP is mandatory. I still haven't got my Amiga Online properly yet, but I think if you've got like one of them PC MCIA wireless cards in the side, or even if you've got some sort of adapter that lets you get onto it over Ethernet, it's quite an interesting thing, because I don't think there's too many online Amiga games. Now, looking at the game itself, it's quite a colourful and well-drawn version of Minesweeper. I mean, this is something I used to play to death back on like Windows 3.1, and was it 3.1 or was it Windows 95? It might have been both, but I think they've removed it from Windows 10 and probably from beyond, because everything's got to go through that terrible store these days. But yeah, it just intrigued me. Minesweeper is just one of them games I've played to death, so go check it out. As usual, I will stick a link to it in the show notes. Now, next up is something that I've been thinking about now for several weeks, just after a couple of discussions. I mean, I tend to cover, I cover game histories, and I just tend to do a single one at a time. But I've always had an interest in like system launches, and I always like reading about them in magazines and stuff. And one thing I've sort of been umming and ahhing about doing is doing like a CD32 special. Now, this would be a bit different as an episode, because it'd probably just like look into the system itself, a few of the stories at the time, just general history about it. Then I'd probably take a bit of time just to, not like I do in a general episode where I just go like 100% into the game and like sort of review it to that degree. I'll look at them as a whole and see what sort of effect they have, and maybe talk about the sales and things. But it's an idea for an episode. I mean, my usual episodes tend to be about 30 minutes long, and I try to keep them short, because I know a lot of people don't tend to like anything after about 30 minutes, and I don't want to put people off listening. But I think something like this would be it'd be a one-off special, because there's no other Amiga consoles. But who knows, if it's successful, I could start looking at the A500, 600, 1200, and maybe just do the odd special along the way. It just depends what people think about it. I think probably the best way of doing this, because it's always difficult to get people to email in, I'll stick a couple of polls up. I'll do it around midweek, so from Wednesday onwards, and I'll put it on the Twitter account, which is at AMIGArama Pod. And I'll do it on the Facebook page, which is facebook.com/AMIGArama. So yeah, just come on there and vote, and if I get enough positives to say people want it, I'll do it. If you say you don't, I won't bother. It's entirely up to you guys, but I'm not going ahead with it unless you guys want me to. It's one of them choices. What can I say? And it's time to move on to this week's game. Now, this is a bit different than what I usually do, because this is actually a listener request, and this came from Zeb Elwood, who's a chap that I met over on the Amiga Facebook group, and about a month or two back now, he actually spent an entire evening, I think I mentioned this in the past, helping me to get my 1200 working. I'm still grateful to him to that day. I mean, I'm still playing with the same 1200. It's absolutely fantastic. But he made a request, and I do accept them, so this is it. Yeah, so Fury of the Furries. Now, this is not something I'm familiar with at all. When I sat down with it, to be honest, I'd never even played it. I think I'd vaguely heard about it in passing, and I've heard like calls of, this is an all-time best Amiga game going, and what a fantastic platformer, and all that stuff. But honestly, it just completely passed me by. I've not even seen a demo. So, I was a bit curious, I suppose, going into it, is it going to be a good game? Is it going to be too quick to cover? There's always some titles. I mean, I've had a couple recommended in the past. I mean, one in particular that keeps coming up is the Amiga version of Pang. But the problem is when I actually sit down with it and try and play through it and try and find out a bit of the history and dig into it and so on, there isn't a lot there to go into. And I think I've done like a couple of test runs. I've done this with some games already. I can't remember the name. I think it was the Crystallians or something like that. But the problem is, if there isn't enough content there that I can make work into a full episode, I'm not going to do it until I can get enough there perhaps later on. I mean, it's some occasions when I've done these test episodes, I mean, I literally got 10 minutes worth of content out of it, and I'm sure that's nice and quick, and maybe some of you will be rubbing your hands together and think, oh, well, that'd make a nice, easy, quick, short podcast. But no, I've got to make the episodes last at least more than 10 minutes, because otherwise, what's the point in doing them? So yeah, let's get on with this one. It was published by a mix really between Callisto and Mindscape. I'm not sure what the deal was there, but Mindscape is a much bigger company. They've published things like Alfred Chicken. Now that's a weird platformer which always reminds me of that Chicken Run movie, because it was roughly out around about that time, I think. Wasn't that a good film? Was that the Wallace and Gromit people? Anyway, oh my god, I am diverging there. Next up, they also did Defender of the Crown. Oh my god, everybody must be aware of what that is by now. Paperboy, tons and tons of like licensed games like that, mostly arcade stuff, but the odd big hit along the way. It was developed by Atreed Concept. Now, they're responsible for games like Brainies. I couldn't read my writing, and I thought that says Paradaladay. It says Paragliding Sim. That was a very odd one. I did have a look at it. It just seems to be a very, very short game, almost like a demo, in fact. And you just had to, you're paragliding, you have to make your people land. And Tiny Squeaks, which is sort of tied into this game. I think there might have been a spin-off or a sort of semi-sequel, maybe much later on. Anyway, it came out in 1993. There was a CD32 version done 12 months later in 1994. I did have a look at that, but from what I could tell, there was no definitely no graphical upgrades to the AGA. They certainly didn't take advantage of any memory or music from what I could tell, and I tried both versions. Anyway, the original come on 5 discs, which were, and I made a note of this, it was hard drive installable, because back in the day this was not a common thing, because I had a 600 and I was constantly trying to get games which would just chuck straight on that drive, and because it was fantastic, because it was all super quick and no messing about with loading and stuff. But to get something like this on 5 discs, but then again, 5 discs, that's almost 10 meg install. That's quite a lot, even for the time. It was priced at $29.99. Bloody hell, that's a lot of money actually, for especially for the time, 93. Most of the games tend to be about £25. So it was coded by Sebastian Locke, that's spelled W-L-O-C-H. But he only seems to have done this game, but he did both versions. So you've got your standard Amiga OCS, and then the CD32 version later. I mean, I wonder if it must have been just like a contract hire or something. Graphics were done by Stephen Bervass, Lionel Gischler, Jean Michel Ringet, Francois Rimerson. From what I could see, the only games that most of them were involved were with this, and something called Bat 2. Now, I think that was a Ubisoft graphic adventure much later. In fact, I think I played that. It must be some years ago. I think it's quite a famous graphic adventure game. I should have looked into that before I started talking. Music, we had Olivia Ballimatra, Frederick Mott. He did games like Goblins, AGE, Galactic Empire, whereas Olivia only got involved on the music for Fury of the Furies, which is surprising actually, which we'll get into later, because there's quite a lot of music in this. I would have thought he'd be more involved in other things, but he wasn't. Now, this was ported to pretty much every computer going at the time. You had an Apple Macintosh version, a Game Boy version. I did briefly have a look at that. It's pretty much the same game, but much more zoomed in, and it's more arcade, and I felt I had a bit more fun with that, actually. I shouldn't be saying that before we got onto the Amiga game. Also, it came out in a PC DOS version, but it was renamed to Pack in Time, but only on the PC edition. I mean, that must have been just to take advantage of the licensing stuff. It must have earned them a lot of money. I've never seen or even played Pack in Time, but that'd be interesting to go back to that and actually have a look. Now, I started looking for interviews from back in the day, and maybe stuff that people have done recently, going back through Retro Gamer, Lemon Amiga, EAB and stuff. I couldn't find next to nothing for this. There's no sort of history. No one seems to talk about it. It's like a forgotten title, which really is a shame, because you'll see when we get to the rest of the game. Now, the story for this is pretty bonkers. It's surprisingly large, actually. There's about 4 pages in the manual of it, but I'll just read out the beginning. The Return. Tinies are probably the most mischievous creatures in the whole galaxy. Their sense of humour is very strange. In some of them, it is positively horrid. So, when some rebel Tinies hid a scientific exploratory spaceship on their home planet Sklumph, disaster was not far off. The furry pilots set off with the intention of invading planet Earth, oh no, and setting everybody against each other. Luckily, the irreparable had only just been avoided. Now at last, the ship is on its way back to Sklumph, and the Tinies on board have come to their senses. But the immediate future is looking ominous, and indeed, on arriving at the constellation of Credalis, the rebel ship's onboard computer suddenly churns out a flood of data. Things are afoot on Sklumph. Now, I don't want to ruin any more of the story, but at this point it's all shown in the introductory cartoon, which is actually quite well animated, which surprised me, with some great sound effects and music and stuff. But basically the king is back home when they all arrive. They crash planet, and he's been changing all the Tinies into things they shouldn't be with some naughty sociable machine. I don't know what that says about the writers for the game, but you basically crash land and you have to get back and save the king and overthrow the wicked one. Very, very random and very, very odd, but it is shown throughout the game as you're exploring. Now, the game itself, it's a 2D puzzle platformer. Now, that might sound very odd, but there's 9 worlds with 90 levels. I mean, this is pretty huge, to be honest. I mean, that don't straight away, 90 levels. That reminds me of something like Super Mario World. Now, the point to each level is you have to aim for an exit, and you have to beat it in a certain time limit. With a goal in mind for each level, you've got 4 types of Tinies that you get to control depending on the level. One of the first things I noticed about this was just how well it actually controls. I mean, it's very, very responsive. The characters react very, very well. It does use up to jump, which is always a grumble of mine, because I always feel like there should be better ways to control it. But especially when it comes to a platformer like this, when you need to be on the ball with the response, really, the responses on the buttons. Tapping Fire uses the current Tinies abilities. If you hold down and press fire, you can tap left and right on the joystick to select each different type of Tinny. There's 4 in total. There's a yellow one, which throws fireballs. He's basically your attack guy. The red one, which can dig down left and right. Basically, you'll come across mounds of dirt within the earth, which you just dig through. A green one, who is basically like Tarzan. He can swing, I think it's like a grappling hook, so he can bounce all over the place, swing this hook and then, off and away across the level. It's a bit like Pitfall in a way. Or maybe Indiana Jones. How did I not think of that one? And then the last one is a blue one. Now, this one can swim and fire underwater, which is actually a lot more handy than you'd think. There's an awful lot of water sections in this, and he also has the ability to raise water levels. Some of the puzzles, you'll be in a closed room with the water at the bottom. You can use him to raise it up and down. Very, very interesting. And a good selection of abilities. The great thing about each of the Tinies that I noticed straight away, if you just leave them there for a few seconds, they will do rather silly things. I suppose it's quite similar at the time that a lot of mascots were doing. But when you've got multiple characters on the screen doing it, they'll put on sunglasses and start messing around and whistling and moving around and stuff whilst you're away from the joystick. It adds to their character, and it is actually a lot more involving than I'm making it sound. Now, when you look at the screen, you've got a nice simple bar right across the bottom. It gives you the choice of all 4 Tinies at once. Depending on the level, they're either blacked out until you find them or free up a section, or they're just all available right from the start. You've also got a time counter on there, a counter for bonuses collected, and a number of lives. One of the greatest things about this I noticed right from the off is no matter where you are or which level you're in, there is music. I mean, every single level or section has its own theme, and they're all divided off into different theme levels. But the fact that you've got someone going to the effort of putting different tunes in there, it really does add to the atmosphere on the levels. Now, the levels themselves, they've got piles upon piles of like one-ups hidden away, teleports, like say activating characters, moving from one section to another. You're actively trying to solve puzzles within each level, and they're usually like simple things to solve, like say moving boxes, getting from one point to another, but there's lots and lots of hidden things in there. One of the great things I noticed was like there's like these hidden sections where you can find like bonus coins. Now, the more bonus coins you get, the more lives you get. I think it's 100 bonuses per life, and you will need them because the game can be fairly difficult. But one of my favourite bonuses I just managed to stumble, and I think it was in about the 3rd or 4th level, is you go through the secret doorway, walk off to the right, you drop down this huge pit, and you're using your green tiny little fella, and there's coins on the left hand side, and you have to keep hooking with a little grappling hook and swinging back and forward to try and capture them all. But you've got a time limit. It's usually about 20-25 seconds or something like that, and if you don't get them all, it's the end of the section. But they really break up the game because there's lots of sections in this which can be quite tough, and you need to put a lot of time into working out puzzles and stuff, and then it breaks up nicely with little sections with like this. They're not too hidden. They're usually not. It's like you'll dig down into the ground, saying you'll find a little opening, there'll be a little sign over above with an arrow. There's usually a hint in an area where something is, so it doesn't just leave you out in the cold. And the thing with this is it's quite difficult to get through. You can get stuck in a lot of sections, so you will burn through a lot of lives. So it's nice that you've at least got the opportunity to pause and get some extra lives along the way. But that's not to say it just throws lives at you willy-nilly, but you'll get to learn the levels and learn where they are, and you can sort of plan around how to get them. There is around 90 levels, which is a hell of a lot, especially for a game like this. But they're all divided into different areas. So there's like where you start off, it's like a sand temple, a jungle, a beach area, Egypt, mountains, a castle-like area, which reminded me of like the Indiana Jones films with the German castle during World War II. I think it was. It was very, very rounded sort of levels with very, very odd themes. But the great thing about it is there's lots and lots of variety. The levels are filled with tons upon tons of traps. You've got to do a lot of puzzle solving to get around them, like simple things like pushing cages and boxes around. You've got to be in lifts at point to solve the section. And the biggest thing you have to do, and it's a bit like Lost Vikings in a way, you have to use the skill of the squeaks you've got to be able to work your way through a level. Now, each of them has a different set of skills, and it can be actually quite complicated. Like the green one's probably the best one straight away, because he can pretty much, they can all jump and bounce, yeah? But the thing is, with the green one, because he can swing that grappling hook constantly, he can be like flying and swinging about the level really, really fast, and it's fantastic sometimes, the amount of levels with a lot of open space and you've got to work your way through. He can be a lifesaver to get you past puzzles. But then there's specific sections, like say, where there's loads of enemies in an area, so you have to clear them out with the fireballs, or the red one needs to dig deep down underground or swim through water and stuff. And the levels are really well presented. There's always a very strict way to get through a puzzle, but you can always use a couple of different abilities just to get through, and it just adds to the variety of things to do throughout the levels. I mean, I'm just loads of things were flying through my head. Like, one of the funniest things I noticed was, like, you can even ride minecarts. It depends on the tiny that you've got with you running through the level, but there's one section in particular, it's almost on a roller coaster, like, and you're going down through the castle area, you're having to swing off and then shoot things as you're going along. It sounds like your typical platformer game, but with this it's a lot more involved and a lot more clever, and the puzzles can be quite devious as you're going through each section. Now, the levels are all puzzle based. There's no like big section of bosses or mini bosses or anything like that. You just have to get from where you start off, get to the exit. If you die, it does tend to throw you right back to the beginning of the level, but you can work through, because most of the levels tend to be short enough that if you get stuck in an area or die too many times, you can usually work your way back pretty quickly. The game just doesn't throw you into these huge puzzle-based areas straight away. When you first start out, there's probably about 3 or 4 levels where it's tutorial-based. You get to learn each Tinies' abilities and how to use them, and then it introduces you quite slowly, and then from about level 5 onwards, it proper throws you in, and then you get stuck in huge sections constantly. Like I say, you do get a limited number of lives, but at least you can collect more, and the entire game seems to evolve more along the lines of solving puzzles using skills. It's all dependent on how you play the game and how you react to what's in a level. It does take a fair bit of skill, because the Tinies do have, it's weird to describe, but it's like a momentum to them, how they bounce through the air. They always seem to remind me of tennis balls, and it's that boing, bounce and a bit of rebound and stuff as you're going. Yes, you do rebound. If you knock into something, you'll come back a slight bit, and it's very hard to describe, and it's very odd, but it does work fairly well with each of the environments that you're in, and most of the areas aren't too enclosed, and you do get enough space to explore and knock your way around, so it works out quite well. The creatures are meant to be these little furry ball-like aliens, but I could not get past the fact that they look like tennis balls. No matter how you look at them, how they move around the screen, that's just exactly what they were. But the other issue I did have with this is the characters are a bit small on the screen. Probably it's not drawn back enough, and there are times when I was looking at it, especially when you're going like through the jungle area and you've got like the green one out, or you're in like the Egyptian area and you've got the yellow one, and the colour scheme isn't great enough that there's enough difference, and when you're trying to quickly to react to things on the screen, you can sort of find yourself sort of drifting away from sections. It's not a huge problem, and it very rarely happens, but the fact that it did happen a couple of times on the journey, and I was just like, oh, that is annoying. I just wish they were a bit more bigger. I mean, they look more like, size-wise, they look more like golf balls when they should actually be tennis balls, so it sort of works against it. Now, the other problem I did have with this is you need an awful lot of skill to be able to play it. I mean, the tutorial levels are perfectly fine. It'll probably take you about 10 or 15 minutes to work your way around them, and I would suggest if you do play it that you really take your time with those and learn how to use the characters, because this game is all about joystick skill. I mean, it can be very frustrating at points where you'll get stuck in an area, and the problem is it'd be nice and something simple. You just have to say, like, you'll have springs on the bottom, springs, like spike on the bottom, spikes on the top, and you have to kamikaze through the middle of them, or use your green guy to swing right through or swim by them, and there's a very small gap. It's quite difficult to do, and you just don't move the direction in the right way on the joystick, or it's not furthering up on the stick or left or right and stuff, and you will hit them and you'll die. I mean, luckily the collision detection is pretty spot on, so there's no sort of like problems in that regard, but when you get stuck in an area and it keeps firing you right back to, say, the beginning of the level, it does become a bit annoying, especially if you have to work through a couple of puzzles before, which you've done repeatedly, and that will keep happening. So the difficulty, it makes the game, but at the same time it does work against it in sections, because you will die an awful lot. And there's other sections where I kept thinking, this does feel a bit unfair. I mean, I really am trying my best. I'm just not very good. But the great thing, I suppose, about it is it nails this just one more go feeling, because it is frustrating. You will get annoyed with it. I mean, some of it is like hair-tearingly annoying, like throw your joypad across the room, and you just sit there for a minute and just think, God damn it, I'm going back in. I've got to have another go. And the number of times that kept happening, just like the first half an hour a lot, and I knew straight away that I was onto something good. There's definitely a good game tucked away here. one of the biggest issues I felt with it as well is that all the worlds, they're quite well designed and stuff. There's a lot of traps, but it's all very still, it's all very static. There's no real movement or great rush to get through them. All the traps are in their own little area, nothing responds to them, you're not really interacting with them. It's just like swinging things or spikes and pits and stuff like that. And alright, it's enough to get through, but I would have liked a bit more clever design around there, make it a bit more involving, not just be like a standard platformer in sections. There's only a little gripe as I was going through it, but one of the biggest things I noticed about it, what it felt was it was just like playing a Lemmings platformer. I don't know how else to describe it, because the look of the levels and the way all the graphics are, and it's got that very cartoony style to it, and that look of like you're gonna die constantly, and the levels seem to be working against you an awful lot. Everything's out to kill you. It doesn't matter what you do, you are going to die. The way the momentum works with the characters as well, and I could never really, at first I found it quite difficult to get my head around it, because it is like you're in control of a ball, and then you press jump to bounce the ball once or a couple of times. They will stop bouncing quite quickly, but when you move the stick left or right, it responds like a bouncing ball as well. There is that bit of momentum to it, and it can be really difficult with some sections where you're trying to work yourself from, say, platform to platform, and you've got to counter in this effect of movement, and it's very, very odd and very, very weird. And even playing for a game for several hours, I still never got my head around it completely. It's quite tough to control. I mean, maybe it's one of the Marmite things. I didn't really get onto it, but there was, I did have quite a bit of fun with it at the same time. You can get used to it. If you can get the skill and learn the controls properly, you will get past the problem. So it's certainly got that going for it. The levels were absolutely packed full of music and different tunes and stuff, which was great. But the most annoying thing about it was none of it's really very catchy. It's very standard platformy fare, and it matches the area that you're in. But, a lot of games like platformers, you'll be humming a certain key tune or a couple of level themes when you're going. And there's just nothing like that in this. It's all very bland and standard, and it's more just like simple background music. It was just a bit disappointing, really, especially for what the rest of the game's like. And then you've just got these sad parts with the music, and it just felt like it needed a little bit more. But again, I'm griping about the fact that at least we've actually got some music, because in my experience of most Amiga games, there's just never anything there. The magazines of the time gave this some very odd scores. The One gave it 90%, CU Amiga 81%, Amiga Computing 80%, Amiga Power 77%, and then Amiga Format with the lowest I could find at 55%. Now it's a very, very mixed bag. There's only one really high one, and I'm always a bit wary of high scores like that, because I think, especially from back in the day, because there were some very dubious things going on with these magazines at the time. But I did find the Amiga Format score very, very bizarre. I mean, there's certainly, even if you're like really frustrated with it and completely stuck in sections, there is not enough in this to mark it down to a 55% game. I mean, the difficulty, and the look of it does look very basic through sections, and the art is not fantastic. It does go against it, but there's certainly not enough to knock it down there. For me, the best part about this is I had loads of fun with it, and it really was a fantastic game to play, and I was sort of hoping in the way there might have been like a modern re-release or something. Maybe I could play on my phone or something like that, because it seems like the perfect sort of controllable game like that. You'd be tapping your screen to use your skill of your weapon and move characters back and forth and stuff. Absolutely fantastic. And there are lots of sections where I get stuck because it was very, very difficult in parts, but even though I was getting really annoyed and frustrated, I would always want to come back. And I spent a good 2 hours when I first started playing it, because I was really getting into it. And I got absolutely stuck. I really could not get past this one section. I was trying for ages. And then I just gave up. I thought, oh, stuff this, I'm not going to cover it. That's how annoyed I was. I won't cover it. And then it's just like the next night I come back and I thought, well, I'll give it another go. And I just sailed through that section. And it's that thing about having the skill with the joystick to be able to play it properly. And I think even sometimes I think it's just based on luck. I mean, no, I'm an amazing game player, absolutely amazing game player. I just needed a bit of practice. But there are sections like that all the time, and it's just a joy to play. I really had some awesome times with it. Now, the biggest problem with it is it does look so basic. That graphically, there's lots and lots of blocks everywhere, which is fine because it matches the level design, but it doesn't look like they've put a lot of thought into it. I mean, that's probably the wrong word. They've not put a lot of graphical design work into the background, you know. It's all very functional, and it looks fine and stuff. The trees look like trees, and the grass looks like grass, and the bits of the castles are fine, but it all looks very copy and paste, and it really does mark it down when it shouldn't, because it does deserve a lot more. But I really wish they'd made that extra effort. It does start off fairly easy, and then the difficulty does tend to ramp up a bit. I wouldn't say it goes sky high. It's not, if you're not into real difficult games, you're not going to be too stuck straight away. It's forgiving enough for you to go back to it and eventually get through. But I did feel, because of how slow it could be and because of how difficult it could be in sections, it's a very, very Marmite game. You'll either love it or you'll hate it. And I'm going to say I did absolutely love it, but I can see where sections, especially later on, I'll be getting so frustrated I'd probably end up giving up. But at the same time, that's a sign of a good game, because I would want to keep coming back and keep making the attempt and having another go. And it really surprised me that there hasn't been some sort of like sequel. I mean, I've really looked into it, and there's just been nothing. Like I say, maybe like an iPad or a phone game or something would have done, or maybe something later on the PC. But from what I could tell, it seemed to do okay on the sales figures and stuff. I mean, there's enough there with the characters, I thought, to have like new mascots and even cover up with a franchise. So it was very, very odd that it just seemed to disappear. But that's the way of life, I suppose. I mean, how many other Amiga games should have had sequels but just never happened? So yeah, I'd highly recommend this one. You might not enjoy it at first, but I'd say there's enough there to make it worth having another go at if you do get stuck. It might be one of them Marmite games, but give it another go. It's certainly worth tracking down. And with that, I think we'll call it a day. As always, guys, thanks for listening. If you've any comments or just want to see some gameplay footage of this in action, then pop on over to AMIGArama.com or drop me a line, Lorfarius@AMIGArama.com, and I will get back to you. Until next time.